I thought my wedding day would be the moment I had always dreamed of, the flowers, the vows, the man I loved waiting at the altar. But when my own sister stood up in front of everyone and announced she was pregnant with my groom's baby, the room gasped, my world shattered, and I realized I had been betrayed in the cruelest way possible. My name is Kate, I am 25 years old, and I never thought I would be telling a story like this, a story where love, betrayal, family, and revenge collide in the most shocking way possible. From the time I was a little girl, I always pictured my wedding day as the happiest day of my life. I imagined myself walking down the aisle, wearing the perfect dress, with my family smiling proudly as I took the hand of the man I loved. Like so many young women, I grew up dreaming about the perfect wedding, the one moment that would mark the beginning of a beautiful life together. And for a while, it felt like that dream was within my reach. It all started when I met Adam. He was tall, confident, and had a way of making me laugh even on the worst days. We met at a friend's birthday party, and while the room was full of noise and chatter, I felt like I only saw him. He wasn't just charming. He was attentive, the kind of man who noticed the little things. If my glass was empty, he filled it. If I looked cold, he offered his jacket. From that night on, we were inseparable. He courted me with flowers, with late-night drives, with promises of forever. And I believed him. I believed every word, every smile, every touch. My family adored him too, or so I thought. My mother would often tell me how lucky I was to have found someone like Adam. My father, a stern man who rarely offered compliments, once said, "He seems like a man who'll take care of you." And my sister, Emily? Well, she smiled, hugged me, and said she was happy for me. But looking back now, those smiles seem different. They were the kind of smiles that hide secrets. Emily was only a year younger than me. We had always had a complicated relationship, one of those sisterly dynamics that teetered between love and rivalry. She was beautiful in her own way, with dark hair, sharp features, and a confidence that sometimes overshadowed me. Growing up, she often seemed to compete with me for attention, from our parents, from friends, even from boys. But I never thought she would take it this far. The months leading up to the wedding were filled with joy and chaos. There were bridal showers, fittings, tastings, and countless late-night planning sessions. Adam seemed excited too, though sometimes I caught him distracted, lost in thought. When I asked if everything was okay, he would smile and say, "Just work stress, babe. Nothing for you to worry about." And I didn't worry. I trusted him. Trust, that word feels like poison in my mouth now. The morning of my wedding arrived in a blur of satin and makeup brushes. My bridesmaids bustled around me, laughter echoing through the room. My dress was everything I had dreamed of, white lace, fitted at the bodice, flowing elegantly to the ground. My veil shimmered with delicate embroidery, and when I caught my reflection in the mirror, I almost cried. For the first time, I saw not just Kate, the girl who had stumbled through heartbreaks and challenges, but Kate the bride. Glowing and ready to step into a new chapter of her life, the church was filled with people, family, friends, coworkers, neighbors. The air buzzed with anticipation. I could hear the music start, signaling my walk down the aisle. My father held out his arm, his expression soft and proud. "Ready, sweetheart?" he asked. I nodded, my heart pounding with excitement. As I walked down the aisle, my eyes locked on Adam. He stood at the altar, handsome in his suit, his smile wide. My heart soared. This was it. This was the moment I had dreamed of. The vows, the rings, the kiss, all of it was seconds away, but then it happened. As the priest began to speak, a voice rang out from the pews. Sharp, loud, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Wait." Everyone turned. My sister Emily stood up, her face flushed, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady. "I can't stay quiet anymore," she said. Her eyes flicked to me, then to Adam, then back to the crowd. "I'm pregnant. And the father is Adam, the groom." The gasp that swept through the church was deafening. My mother covered her mouth, my father's face turned to stone, and whispers spread like wildfire. I froze, my bouquet trembling in my hands. My mind went blank. For a moment, I couldn't even process the words. Pregnant? With Adam's baby? No. No, it couldn't be true. This had to be some kind of sick joke, a twisted attempt at attention. But the look on Emily's face told me it wasn't a joke. I turned to Adam, desperate for him to deny it, to laugh and call it absurd. But his face? His face betrayed me. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened, but no words came. His silence was louder than any confession. The bouquet slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. My knees felt weak, my chest tight. Around me, guests whispered, their eyes darting between me. Adam and Emily. My world, my perfect day. My perfect dream, it all collapsed in an instant. I wanted to scream. To demand an explanation, but all I could do was stare at Adam. Tears blurring my vision. The man I had trusted, the man I had loved, the man I was about to marry, he had betrayed me with my own sister. Emily's voice broke through the noise. I'm not doing this to hurt you, Kate, she said, though her tone carried no remorse. I just couldn't let you walk into a marriage built on lies. You deserve the truth. The truth. The word rang hollow. Because the truth wasn't just betrayal, it was destruction, the priest stammered, unsure what to do. My father stepped forward, his voice booming. Is this true, Adam? Adam finally spoke, his voice shaky. Kate, I never meant for it to happen. It was a mistake, I swear. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything. The words sliced through me. A mistake. My sister's pregnancy was a mistake. My wedding day humiliation was a mistake. My entire relationship, was it all a mistake? The guests began to murmur louder, some leaving, others watching with morbid fascination. My mother tried to come to me, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, shattered, broken. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Pain turned to anger. Humiliation turned to fire. If Adam and Emily thought they could destroy me so easily, they were wrong. I would not collapse on that altar. I would not let my wedding day end in ruin without a fight. I lifted my chin, wiped the tears from my cheeks, and looked Emily straight in the eye. Congratulations, I said, my voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. You've just revealed the kind of people you and Adam really are. But you haven't destroyed me. You've exposed yourselves. Gasps filled the room again. Adam's face paled, Emily's confidence faltered for just a moment, and I knew then that this story wasn't going to end with me as the victim. This was just the beginning, and as I turned away from the altar, walking back down the aisle I had just proudly entered, I made a silent vow. They would regret the day they ever betrayed me. When I left the church that day, I didn't feel like a bride whose wedding had fallen apart. I felt like a soldier retreating from a battlefield, carrying wounds no one could see but that cut deeper than flesh. The whispers followed me as I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped into the blinding sunlight. My dress, once a symbol of joy, now felt like a cage of lace and satin. Guests parted like waves as I walked past them, some pitying, some judgmental, some simply curious. Every step felt like dragging my heart across shards of glass. My mother caught up with me in the church courtyard, breathless. Kate, wait. Don't go, please. We can talk about this. Her voice shook, her eyes pleading. I looked at her, at the woman who had raised me, and for the first time, I felt as though even she couldn't understand the magnitude of what had just happened. Talk. I whispered. Mom, the man I was about to marry got my sister pregnant. What's left to talk about? Tears welled in her eyes, but she said nothing. My father, standing stiffly nearby, had his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. We'll handle this, he muttered, his voice low but furious. That boy won't get away with this. But it wasn't just that boy. It was Emily too. My sister. The girl I had shared a bedroom with growing up, the girl who borrowed my clothes without asking, the girl who knew all my secrets. She had looked me in the eye and betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. I didn't know which hurt more, Adam's silence or Emily's smug revelation. I ripped the veil from my head and handed it to my mother. I need to be alone, I said, my voice hollow. And before they could stop me, I walked away. I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I found myself wandering aimlessly through the streets, ignoring the stares from strangers as they noticed the bride walking alone in her gown. Some pointed, some whispered, but I didn't care. My feet eventually led me to a small park, quiet and nearly empty. I sat on a bench, the satin pooling around me, and finally let the sobs escape. I cried for what felt like hours. I cried for the years I had wasted loving Adam. I cried for the sister I had lost long before I even realized she was gone. I cried for the dream that had been shattered in front of everyone I knew. But beneath the tears, something else simmered. Something dark. Something sharp. Anger. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Emily hadn't just slipped up. She had planned it. She had chosen my wedding day, my most vulnerable moment, to make her announcement. She could have told me weeks ago, days ago, even the night before. But no, she had stood up in front of hundreds of people and humiliated me, knowing exactly how much it would destroy me. That wasn't an accident. That was calculated. And Adam? His silence spoke louder than her words. He hadn't denied it. He hadn't defended me. He had looked at me with guilt plastered on his face, like a child caught stealing candy. He had confessed with his eyes before his mouth ever formed the words. He had betrayed me, and worse, he had allowed Emily to be the one to reveal it. As though I deserved to be blindsided. I wiped my tears, smearing makeup across my cheeks, and straightened my spine. No. I wouldn't let this be the end of my story. If Emily and Adam thought they could tear me down and walk away unscathed, they were wrong. They had lit a fire inside me, and I would not stop until that fire consumed every lie they had built. When I finally returned home, I peeled the dress off my body and stuffed it into a garbage bag. I couldn't bear to look at it. The lace, the beads, the veil, they all felt poison now. I threw the bag into the back of my closet and shut the door. That chapter was closed. For days, I locked myself away, barely eating, barely sleeping. Messages and calls flooded my phone. Some from friends offering sympathy, some from nosy relatives fishing for gossip, and a few from Adam himself. I ignored most of them, but one night, curiosity got the better of me, and I listened to one of Adam's voicemails. "Kate, please," his voice cracked through the speaker. "I know I messed up. I know you hate me right now, but it wasn't supposed to happen this way. Emily, she means nothing to me. You're the one I love. You always have been. I made a mistake. Please, don't give up on us." I nearly threw the phone across the room. A mistake. That word again. He had slept with my sister, maybe more than once, and now she was pregnant. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. A betrayal. I deleted the message and blocked his number, but the betrayal gnawed at me, keeping me awake at night. I needed answers. How long had this been going on? How could Emily do this to me? Was she in love with Adam, or was it just some twisted game to steal what was mine? I decided to confront her. When I showed up at her apartment unannounced, she looked surprised but not ashamed. She opened the door, her hair tied messily, her hand resting on the barely noticeable swell of her stomach. "Kate," she said, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. "I figured you'd come eventually." I pushed past her into the apartment. "Why, Emily?" My voice trembled, but it wasn't from weakness. It was from rage. "Why would you do this to me? To your own sister?" She closed the door, leaned against it, and crossed her arms. "You think everything's always about you, don't you? You've always had the attention, the love, the admiration. Mom and Dad were always so proud of you, the perfect daughter, the bride-to-be with her dream fiancé. And me? I was always in your shadow." I stared at her in disbelief. "So this is about jealousy? About attention? You ruined my life because you wanted the spotlight for once." She smirked, a cruel twist of her lips. "It's not just about that. Adam came to me. He wasn't as loyal to you as you thought. You put him on a pedestal, but he needed someone who saw the real him. I gave him that." Her words made me feel sick, but beneath the sickness was something else: clarity. Emily didn't just want Adam. She wanted to destroy me. She wanted to take what was mine, not because she loved him, but because she hated me. I stepped closer, my voice low but sharp. "You think this is a victory, Emily? You think having his child makes you special? All you've done is tie yourself to a liar and a coward. He didn't choose you because he loves you. He chose you because you were easy. Because you wanted so badly to beat me that you let him use you." For the first time, her smirk faltered. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, I looked back. "This isn't over. You've taken your shot at me, but you've underestimated me. You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming. The weeks that followed were a blur of planning. I didn't know exactly what my revenge would look like yet, but I knew one thing: it had to be public. Just as they had humiliated me in front of everyone, I would expose them for what they truly were. Their lies, their betrayal, their ugliness, all of it would come to light. I began quietly gathering information. I talked to mutual friends, asking innocent questions, listening carefully. I learned that Adam and Emily had been seen together more often than I realized, always brushing it off as family closeness. I found out that Adam had been unfaithful even before Emily. Rumors of flings whispered among acquaintances. The picture was becoming clear: Adam was a serial liar, and Emily was foolish enough to believe she was special. The hardest part was seeing my parents. My mother looked at me with sadness in her eyes every time we spoke. "She's still your sister, Kate," she said one evening, her voice trembling. "And that baby? It's your blood too." I shook my head. "That baby is the result of betrayal. Don't ask me to love it, not now." My father was harsher. He refused to speak to Emily at all, calling her actions disgusting and unforgivable. But I knew the cracks in our family were permanent. There was no going back to how things were. One night, lying awake in bed, I realized something: I didn't just want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted the world to see Adam and Emily not as a happy couple expecting a child, but as the liars and backstabbers they truly were. And I wouldn't rest until I found a way to make that happen. The day after I promised myself I would not be passive anymore, I woke up with a plan I could taste. Anger is a crude fuel, but it can be sharpened into something efficient if you know how to use it. For days I'd flailed in grief and rage. Now I would move. I wasn't interested in petty revenge. I wanted something that would strip the veneer off both of them so completely that no one could mistake who they truly were. I wanted the world to see them as I did, two people who had treated me like a prop and who had tried to build a life on deceit. I wanted them exposed, and I wanted my family to have the facts they needed to choose sides with eyes open. First, I needed evidence, not gossip, not murmurs, but concrete proof: messages, photographs, receipts. Anything that would show a pattern rather than a single regrettable night. I started with the things within my reach. I scoured my own phone for texts I'd overlooked, reread old voicemails, and combed through photos from the last year. Bridesmaids group chats, candid snaps, party pictures. I looked at every frame through a new lens. When you're looking for betrayal, ordinary moments suddenly take on different meanings. A photo of Adam and Emily laughing at a barbecue, once innocuous, now looked like two conspirators. A selfie of them sitting close on the couch, Emily's hand on Adam's knee, felt like a footprint left in wet cement. Next, I reached out quietly to people who might know things I didn't. There was the friend who had been too polite to mention the number of times she'd seen them together in the weeks I thought Adam was planning the wedding. There was the bartender from the bar where Adam liked to celebrate business wins, who had once seen him leave with a woman who wasn't my sister. I didn't ask for drama. I asked for honesty. People responded differently. Some were sympathetic and told me things straight away. Others were reluctant, guilty about being involved even peripherally in someone else's betrayal. But the chorus of small details slowly became a choir. One of the most important pieces came from a woman named Jenna, a friend of Adam's from college who I'd texted after tracing where he'd worked and the circles he ran in. Jenna didn't want to speak at first. She feared getting involved. But when I explained that this wasn't about shaming people for the thrill of it, that this was about stopping a pattern, she agreed to help. She sent me screenshots of messages Adam had once sent her, flirtatious and entitled, messages that suggested he loved the conquest more than the companion. She wrote a short note about an instance years prior when he had pressured a girlfriend and shown a temper that frightened her. Her testimony wasn't explosive on its own, but layered with what I'd already found, it painted a portrait. Then there were the receipts. I managed to pull some online records showing late-night reservations at hotels under Adam's name. Dates that lined up with times he'd told me he was working late. It wasn't proof of infidelity with Emily, not by itself, but it undermined everything he'd said. The pattern mattered. When people lie repeatedly, the truth tends to appear in little, boring ways: a calendar entry, a credit card charge, a red receipt left unread. I collected those little, ordinary traces like a sculptor collecting shards to form a mosaic. All the while, I pretended to be fine in front of our circle. People came by with casseroles, friends sent messages asking if I wanted coffee. Some offered platitudes that made me grind my teeth. Others sat and listened. My parents were a torn mess. My mother oscillated between fierce protectiveness and an almost desperate desire to believe a different version of reality, the one where her eldest daughter still had a wedding to mourn but not a betrayal to fix. My father paced and muttered and swore he would handle that atom boy if I wanted him to, but he also hesitated. Because the truth is complicated when it involves people your family once welcomed into their living room. I knew there would be a price to pay for exposing them, even if what I revealed was accurate. Families splinter. Sides get taken. Bridges burn. But I also knew where my moral line lay. I wasn't going to publicly humiliate anyone with lies. Everything I collected I verified, cross-checked, and backed up. If I was going to pull the rug out from under them, I would make sure they went down because of their own choices, not mine. I hired a private investigator. The thought felt dramatic, like something out of a movie, but it was practical. I didn't want to stalk them. I wanted facts from someone who could access things I could not: property records, hotel reservation confirmations, pieces of digital breadcrumbs. The PI I chose was discreet and professional, a woman named Mercedes with steely eyes and a calm voice. "We won't do anything flashy," she told me the first time we met. "We'll find patterns, dates, paper trails. We'll paint a picture that makes sense in court and in a living room." I liked her immediately. She didn't court drama. She dealt in verification. While Mercedes worked, life around me continued in its warped way. Emily announced, with all the performative drama of someone claiming a prize, that she was planning a gender reveal party for the baby. She posted a candid, curated Instagram story about new beginnings and family coming together, and my stomach turned. She was trying to control the narrative, turning what should have been our family's moment into proof that she'd claimed what she wanted. She hadn't even considered what it did to me, and the thought made something cold and resolute settle into my bones. I decided then that I would not let her rewrite the story. I started planning where the exposure would land for maximum clarity. A private confrontation in a kitchen with just family would be quick, yes, but its reach would be limited. A broad, public reveal, in front of people who mattered in our community, who would then spread the truth without the taint of my bias, would make the facts undeniable. I thought about wedding anniversaries, holiday gatherings, and other sentimental moments. The gender reveal party was perfect in a way I couldn't have invented. Emily planned to parade the baby bump and invite all our relatives and friends. She would have cameras. She would expect cheers. Instead, I would use the platform she created to present the evidence that exposed both the betrayal and the pattern of deceit. Mercedes returned a week later with files and dates that made a map. She had found hotel reservations, some under a corporate account that Adam had access to through his job, some under his name. She had emails confirming business lunches at odd hours and credit card charges that matched the dates Adam had told me he was working. She had copies of messages between Adam and other women, not just Emily, that revealed a flirtatious, entitled tone and a habit of using charm to avoid consequences. She even turned up a casually written letter from an ex-girlfriend to Adam, years ago, asking him to stop contacting her because she found his behavior controlling and frightening. Her findings were clinical. And when she laid them out, I felt like a barrister presenting a case. This was not rumor anymore. It was a dossier. With the dossier in my hand, I began to consider timing and framing. I wanted to ensure that my actions didn't look like vindictive theatrics. So I decided to give them a chance to explain privately, one last time, before I took things into the light. I sent Emily a text, calm and even, asking to meet for coffee. She replied quickly, warm and a little defensive, agreeing to meet the next afternoon at a place we both used to frequent as girls. I told her I wanted a conversation between sisters, and she said okay. The truth is that I wanted to watch her react. I wanted to see the person who had staged my public humiliation in private. Without the manicured performance. We met at the small cafe we used to visit as kids. The one with the chipped blue tiles and the barista who always remembered our coffee orders. Emily arrived earlier than I expected, her hair pulled up in a loose bun, her hands cradling a warm cup of tea. The baby bump showed in a way that made me physically recoil. She greeted me with that already practiced tenderness she reserved for the world, not for me, and sat with an air of delicacy. I watched her over the rim of my mug and felt my anger expand and ricochet. "Kate," she said, her voice soft. "I'm glad you came." "So am I," I replied, my voice low. "I wanted to ask you some questions." I kept my tone calm. Rage is a poor interrogator. Patience unravels the guilty faster. She nodded, a little wary. "Okay. Ask." "Did you plan to tell me?" I asked. "Or did you plan to humiliate me?" She flinched. "What I did was because I couldn't stand to watch you marry a man who was lying to you. I thought I was doing the right thing." "You thought humiliating me in front of our entire family was the right thing?" I demanded. "Why not tell me privately? Why not talk before? Why choose the altar? Why choose a moment when my defenses would be down?" My words weren't polite. Politeness didn't suit the heat that seared through me. She blinked, and for the first time that afternoon I saw a crack in her practiced composure. "Because it wouldn't have mattered, Kate. You wouldn't have believed me. You always trust people who look good on paper. You always choose what looks right. I had to force the truth into the open so you couldn't ignore it." I stared at her until the cafe noise seemed far away. Her answer confirmed something I'd already suspected. This wasn't about saving me. It was about annoying the person who'd been favored all her life. It was a power move, and the baby, whether wanted or not, was leverage. "And Adam?" I said. "Was he always a liar, or did you too? Was this a thing between you?" Her mouth thinned. "We've been involved for months. It started as a mistake, but it became something. He says he loves me." She said the words as if cataloging a grocery list. "He tells me I'm important. He says he wants us to be a family." The cynic in me wanted to laugh, sharp and ugly. "He tells everyone that. He is practiced. How do you not see that he tells you what you want to hear in the moment and then leaves behind the consequences?" But instead I kept my voice measured. I had a file and a plan. I had no need for theatrics in a cafe. "You sound like he's the monster here, but you're not innocent either," I said. "You chose to do this on a day that mattered to me. You used a child, a life, as a weapon. That is not love. That is power." She paled. For a few moments she didn't speak. Then she said, with a voice that sounded small and surprisingly sincere, "I thought the baby would change things. I thought if I had a child with him, he would stay. I wanted what you had, Kate. I wanted someone to look at me with pride." The rawness in her voice punched a new hole in my resolve. I felt anger, but I also felt pity, the ugly kind that doesn't forgive but understands the brittle places people hide. Our conversation didn't clear everything. It raised more questions. There was a sense of co-conspiracy that two people now shared, and I had to account for both of them. If they were both culpable, the exposure needed to consider their mutual culpability. And if Emily was manipulative enough to use a pregnancy as currency, then the way she would react to exposure might be extreme. I could imagine her spinning, throwing herself into performance, accusing me of being cruel, or worse, weaponizing sympathy. The truth was my ballast. I had to stay tethered to it and not be dragged by theatrics. After the cafe, I met with Mercedes and we refined the dossier. We added Emily's own words, the timeline she'd freely given in an impulsive moment, and merged it with the receipts, the messages, and Jenna's testimony. Mercedes advised caution. "You can bring it out on the right stage," she said, "but be mindful of the fallout. People will take sides. Your parents will be hurt. Make sure you have the support you need before you pull the curtain." She was right. I needed a plan that accounted for consequences, not just spectacle. The gender reveal came up faster than I expected. Emily had organized it in her and Adam's new apartment, a little backyard party with colored balloons set to explode in a sugary cloud of pink or blue. She'd invited the family, the neighbors, and people from our old neighborhood. When I got the invitation in the mail, it felt like a slap. The date was 2 weeks away. The timing was perfect from her perspective, and perfect from mine. I decided to go, but not as an unprepared, wounded woman. I would go prepared, professional even, with facts that could not be waved away as a jealous dramatist's fantasies. In the intervening days I prepared emotionally and logistically. I talked with my lawyer, yes, I had consulted one quietly, about defamation risk and about my rights. My lawyer, a pragmatic woman named Diane, said something that steadied me: you can expose the truth if you have evidence. The law won't protect lies, but it will punish someone who publishes falsehoods. Make sure everything you present is verifiable and documented. I nodded. Diane suggested I bring a trusted witness, someone from outside the family who could corroborate the timeline and the documents if Emily or Adam decided to counter-accuse. Mercedes and Jenna agreed to be present as quiet witnesses. Rosa would, too, though I didn't tell Emily she'd be there. On the day of the gender reveal, the backyard smelled of grilled chicken and cheap perfume, children's laughter and the hum of a portable speaker. Emily glowed with the smugness of someone who believed she'd won. Adam hovered nearby, the same practiced grin that had cheated me so utterly during vows and the cake. Guests pried open champagne and smiled for selfies. No one seemed to sense the tension simmering beneath the surface. I arrived late, dressed plainly in jeans and a soft sweater, my hair pulled back. I kept my phone turned off, my demeanor steady. When the time came, Emily stood in the center and announced it was time to find out whether she would have a boy or a girl. There were the usual cheers, the eager looks. The balloon popped, a rain of blue confetti. Someone shouted happily. Glasses clinked. I felt the air close around me like a throat tightening. This was her big moment. This was the one she'd always wanted, and then, quietly, I stepped forward. No one noticed at first. Their eyes were still focused on the confetti. I walked to the sound system, where a crude playlist still played, took the microphone, and said, "Excuse me." My voice carried in the way that comes from someone who has been silent for too long and then finds air. The backyard hushed. Conversation stopped mid-chew. Emily's smile froze. "I want to speak for a moment," I said. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I spoke in a voice that belonged to someone who'd learned to be exact. This is a private celebration, but I think there are some facts, and some questions, that deserve to be on the table. I have evidence that shows Adam has been unfaithful, not just to me, but publicly, repeatedly. I have messages, hotel bookings, and testimony from people who have been hurt. I also have proof that he and Emily have been involved for months. This is not comfort or family drama. This is betrayal, and it deserves to be known. There was a stunned silence. I let it sit. I will not let my sister claim innocence when she staged my humiliation to get what she wanted, I continued. If you want to cheer for a child, do it with full knowledge of how that child came into our family's life. I am not asking for pity. I'm asking for truth. I gestured subtly and Mercedes stepped forward, then Jenna, and then Rosa. They stood with me. Mercedes had hard copies of receipts. Jenna had screenshots. Rosa had the wedding video Rosa had saved after she'd filmed it with trembling hands that day. I handed copies to Diane, who had come too, so we had a lawyer's presence, not for intimidation, but for clarity. People murmured, some angry, some shocked, some in denial. Emily's face went past pale into something that looked like panic. Adam tried to grab the microphone from me, his voice raised and loud and ridiculous. "You're ruining a celebration," he shouted. "How dare you accuse us in front of people?" But his voice seemed thin. People at the party were no longer enjoying themselves. They were watching a drama unfold. The difference between my action and Emily's earlier one was that I had proof. I presented it calmly, piece by piece, the hotel confirmation, excerpts of messages that showed his pattern, Jenna's statement, and Rosa's video. This wasn't a neat, cinematic moment. It wasn't a swift public execution. It was messy, real, human. People argued. Someone recorded. Someone else shouted that this was a private matter. But the key thing was that the narrative had shifted. Until that point, Emily and Adam had controlled the narrative by hiding behind performance and staged emotion. I forced daylight into their shadowed corners, and daylight changes things. The fallout that evening was immediate. Some guests left in disgust. A few of Emily's friends left her, not wanting to be tied to someone who had publicly humiliated a sister. Adam's colleagues, the ones who'd been invited at Emily's insistence, found themselves suddenly uncomfortable when the receipts I'd shown implicated him in questionable behavior. The online ripple began that night. Someone had streamed parts of it, and within hours my side of the story plus the documents were spreading across social media. People took sides. People were cruel. It stung. But the basic truth was now visible, and truth, even when it hurts, is harder to refute than a single dramatic proclamation made in a church. In the days that followed, the consequences mounted. Adam's employer called him in after a viral clip linked his name to unprofessional conduct. He was placed on leave pending an internal review. Emily faced calls from family and old friends asking how she could have behaved as she did. Our parents were devastated. They tried to broker peace, but the fissures in our family were deep. Some relatives sided with me publicly. Others stayed silent. It hurt, but it was inevitable when you unmask people who relied on charm to hide their misdeeds. There were ugly days. Emily lashed out in private messages and on public posts that tried to spin the events as my attempt to destroy her happiness. People can be vicious when their facade is threatened. They find ways to victimize themselves in order to survive others' judgment. But amid the attacks, there were also small victories. Jenna's testimony prevented someone else from being manipulated in the future. Rose's video gave my family a chance to see what had been done to me in a way they couldn't deny. The evidence did its work, and then something unexpected happened. In the middle of all of this, Adam reached out to me, begging for a private meeting. I was tempted to refuse. I almost did. But I wanted closure, and I had questions that required answers from the man who had orchestrated the deepest betrayal of my life. We met in a small conference room at my lawyer Diane's office, a neutral place where the conversation would be witnessed and where there would be a record that he was smaller than I remembered. Not in height but in presence. The bravado he'd paraded like armor was gone. He apologized at length, and in his apology there were slivers of self-awareness mixed with panic and self-preservation. I was a coward, he said at one point. I wanted what I wanted and I didn't think about who it would hurt. He tried to place blame on different things: the pressure to climb socially, the thrill, the way Emily made him feel seen. None of it absolved him. It explained him, in the way a diagnosis explains illness, useful for treatment, not an excuse for harm. I listened. I asked him why he had let Emily be the one to publicly destroy me. He looked at the table, ashamed. Because I'm an idiot, he said simply. Because I thought you'd forgive me, and because I wanted it all. His honesty was crude and wounding, but honest. When people like him finally drop the performance, you see the hollow man beneath. He had no nobility left to salvage. I didn't need to hear another apology. I had the facts, and the family had them too. My decision then was practical. I told Diane I wanted to see a legal separation from any claims Adam might make on future family matters that might affect my parents' estate. I wanted a clean line. Diane drafted the paperwork. I wanted to protect my own life, my family home, and to make sure that if Emily's baby, a real human being in the future, needed support, it would be provided in ways that didn't reward betrayal. In the end, my revenge was not theatrical. It was quiet, methodical, and careful. I exposed the pattern, ensured witnesses, and let consequences follow. People were shocked, some hurt, some angry, but truth had been served. My sister's smug smile faded into something harder to watch, the slow realization that the pedestal she'd stepped onto was unstable. Adam's bravado crumbled into professional consequences and the kind of loneliness that only someone who has built life on others' admiration can truly understand. When people asked me later if I felt satisfied, I couldn't give a simple answer. The exposure had narrow justice built in. He lost job opportunities and respect, she lost friends and the easy adoration she had chased. But I also lost a sister, at least for a long time, and a wedding that would never be replaced. The cost of truth is not free. It extracts its own payments. Yet I would make that trade again, 100 times over. If it meant that my story, my dignity, would be reclaimed. And in the weeks and months that followed, as people adjusted and the venom cooled, something else happened that surprised me. My life, which had been defined by one shattered afternoon, started to redefine itself on my own terms. I found friends who stood with me not out of obligation but out of respect. I found work that kept me busy and steady. I found a quiet pleasure in mornings that had nothing to do with weddings or drama. The scar of betrayal remained, but it became part of the texture of my life rather than its script. I had set out to expose and to protect, and I had done both. The fallout was messy and human and, ultimately, necessary. When the last of the dust settled and the world returned to its ordinary preoccupations, I realized that revenge had been a poor word for what I'd done. I had sought justice, yes, but I had also reclaimed myself. The rest, healing, forgiveness, living, would come in time, on my terms and in my rhythm. After the gender reveal exploded into chaos and the guests left in fractured silence, I returned home to an apartment that suddenly felt less like a refuge and more like a war room. The walls seemed to hum with the energy of what had just happened. Every breath I took echoing with the memory of Emily's pale face, Adam's panicked shouting, and the stunned silence of our friends and relatives. For the first time since that church humiliation, I felt like I had tilted the balance. The story wasn't only theirs anymore. I had taken back my voice, but revenge, I quickly learned, doesn't end with a single reveal. Consequences ripple. They spread into family dinners, holiday invitations, friendships, work relationships. Some people called me brave. Others called me cruel. There were whispers that I had gone too far, that family matters should stay behind closed doors. And yet, for every critic, there was someone who quietly messaged me to say, "Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for showing the truth." It was a strange mix, vindication and isolation woven together like threads of the same fabric. The first fallout came from my parents. My mother called the next morning, her voice raw from crying. "Kate, what you did last night. It was too much," she said. "You shouldn't have aired everything in front of everyone. Do you know how embarrassed your father and I are? Do you know what people are saying?" I swallowed my anger, but it bubbled beneath the surface. "Do you know what people were saying about me when Emily stood up at my wedding? When Adam stayed silent? Did you care about embarrassment then, Mom? Or only now that the truth makes everyone uncomfortable?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, softer, "You're right. But she's still your sister. And that baby, don't," I cut her off. "Don't ask me to feel sympathy for a child that was conceived through betrayal. Maybe someday I'll find a way to separate the child from the choices of its parents, but not now. Not while the wound is still open." My father was less conflicted. He called me separately that evening, his voice firm. "You did what had to be done," he said simply. "Emily chose her path, Adam chose his, and you had every right to defend yourself. I won't blame you for speaking the truth." His support steadied me, but it also deepened the rift between my parents. My mother tried to play peacemaker. My father dug his heels in. Holidays became impossible to imagine without tension. Meanwhile, Emily stayed mostly silent in public, but her silence was louder than words. She unfollowed me on every platform, blocked my number, and told mutual friends she needed space from Kate's cruelty. Yet she never once denied the evidence I'd presented. Not once. Because she couldn't. The proof was there. Her silence was its own confession. Adam, on the other hand, spiraled. Within a week of the reveal, rumors spread that he had been suspended from his job pending review. His employer didn't want the negative publicity tied to his name, especially with screenshots of his messages circulating online. His friends distanced themselves, some publicly, others quietly fading away. His polished mask had cracked, and without it, he was just another man exposed for what he was: deceitful, selfish, reckless. But Adam didn't go quietly. One night, a week after the reveal, he showed up outside my apartment. I was in the kitchen, heating leftover soup, when I heard the pounding on the door. My stomach dropped. When I peeked through the peephole, there he was, disheveled, eyes bloodshot, fists hammering against the wood. "Kate!" he shouted. "Kate, open the damn door. You ruined my life. You think you're better than me? You think you can just destroy me?" My heart pounded, but I didn't open the door. Instead, I dialed the police. While I waited, I pressed my back against the wall, listening as his voice cracked into desperation. I loved you, Kate. I made a mistake, but I loved you. We could have fixed this. Why did you have to drag everyone into it? When the police arrived, their flashing lights painting the hallway blue and red, Adam backed off. They spoke to him briefly, then warned him to leave. He glared at my door one last time before storming off. Watching from the window, I felt both terrified and vindicated. Terrified because his rage was unpredictable. Vindicated because his behavior proved everything I had said about him. I filed a restraining order the next day. It was granted quickly, thanks to the witnesses and his outburst. For the first time, I felt a measure of safety, a legal shield between me and his chaos. As weeks turned into months, the dust began to settle, though the scars remained. Emily continued her pregnancy, posting carefully curated photos of her journey, crafting a narrative that painted her as a woman wronged by her cruel sister. Some people bought into it. Others didn't. I stayed silent, refusing to engage in online battles. My silence frustrated her, I knew it did, because without my responses, her narrative sounded like shouting into a void. Instead, I focused on rebuilding myself. I went back to work, threw myself into projects I had neglected while planning the wedding. I started therapy, where I unpacked the layers of betrayal and pain that had been weighing on me. My therapist told me something that stuck: closure doesn't come from them apologizing. It comes from you deciding you don't need their apology to move forward. I began to understand what she meant. Revenge had fueled me in the beginning. Justice had steadied me. But healing required something else. Release. It wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake, replaying Emily's smug voice at the altar, Adam's guilty silence, the gasps of the guests. There were mornings I woke up with anger burning in my chest, the desire to see them suffer more. But slowly, I began to find moments of peace. A walk in the park. A cup of coffee in silence. The laughter of friends who hadn't abandoned me. Little things that reminded me life was bigger than their betrayal. Then, one afternoon, I received a call from Rosa. Have you seen the news? She asked, her voice tight. I hadn't. She sent me a link. It was an article about Adam. He had been officially terminated from his job after an internal investigation confirmed inappropriate conduct and misuse of company resources. The article detailed the very patterns I had exposed: the hotel stays, the false claims of work meetings. His career, once promising, was effectively over. I stared at the screen. A mix of emotions flooding me. Satisfaction, yes, but also sadness. Sadness that the man I had once loved had crumbled so completely, that his choices had led him here. But I reminded myself, these were his choices. He had betrayed me, betrayed Emily, betrayed himself. His downfall wasn't mine to mourn. Emily's story unraveled more quietly. Whispers reached me that she struggled financially after Adam lost his job. She leaned heavily on my mother, who provided support despite my father's disapproval. Some friends drifted away from her too, unwilling to stay entangled in the mess. She tried to keep up appearances online, but the cracks showed, the forced smiles, the vague captions. Behind the filters, she was struggling. For months, I debated whether to reach out to her. Part of me wanted to, not for reconciliation, but for the baby. An innocent life had been dragged into this mess, and despite everything, I didn't want that child to grow up unloved or unsupported. But every time I considered it, I remembered the look on Emily's face as she announced her pregnancy at my wedding. The satisfaction in her voice, the cruelty in her timing. And I couldn't bring myself to cross that line. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What I did instead was focus on building a life where I didn't define myself by betrayal. I enrolled in evening classes, determined to pursue a degree I had put off while planning a future with Adam. I traveled with friends, visited new places, and filled my days with experiences that reminded me I was alive, free, and worthy of happiness. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the wedding that never was, I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment. I wasn't wearing a gown this time, just jeans and a sweater. But when I looked at my reflection, I didn't see the broken bride I had once been. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out stronger. I whispered to myself, you survived. You reclaimed yourself. And that is enough. The scars of betrayal will never fully fade, but they no longer define me. Adam and Emily had written a cruel chapter in my life, but I had closed the book on them. My story was mine again, and this time, I was the author,